I guess we'll get right into it. So Sarah, welcome. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet
I'm,
you as well.
I'm Jay. So this is for I do two podcasts. One's called the Jazz Real Book. One's called 30 Albums for 30 Years,
Mhm.
and we have a lot of guests on, and it's heard internationally. So hopefully, it brings some more attention to your fantastic group. Which I was, one of the great things about doing this is I get to discover music that I wasn't aware of, and you now have another fan because I think what you guys do is phenomenal.
Oh, well, thank you very much. That's really
Appreciate
kind
it.
of you to say.
That's great. So I just wanted to get like a little bit of individual background. So if I can kind of break it off just a little. And Joe, it's funny, just we have a lot of commonalities in some ways. First of all, you're exactly 20 days older than me.
Ah,
'Cause
okay.
and
There's not much wisdom in those 20 days.
uh, it might be, it probably is.
I don't expect much.
And one of the names that popped up, a guy who used to work here, Barry Mittenhoff, used to
Oh,
work in the studio.
on
Yeah.
one of the nicest and kindest and most wonderful people that I or anyone else has ever met. And you won't hear anything different from anyone who's ever met Barry. Just the most wonderful guy.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, he was only here for a short time. He had taught like a bluegrass type of workshop,
No.
uh, and he did pretty well with it. And yes, I mean, the most gentle, sweetest guy I think you could
I
ask.
I took a few lessons with him, and it was actually he's the reason why I ended up going to Italy because he hooked me up with Carlo Alonso, who eventually became one of my main teachers. Um, and I continued for many years to sort of rely on him for just mandolin related things and my connection to a lot of different kinds of worlds, like acoustic music worlds, and you know,
Mhm.
and I also used to use him when I teach students. I would say, here's how I learned how to play. And you're welcome to emulate me if it works for you. But also I studied with a guy named Barry Mitterhoff who puts two fingers on the front of his instrument and plays like this the whole time. And he sounds great. So, and I don't play that way, but the point I'm trying to make is there's no homogeneity of technique in this instrument. So you can take the bits that work for you. Um,
Yeah, I mean, so even going back a little, how did you come to play the mandolin? What is your earliest musical experiences with the instrument?
well, I started on violin when I was 4 years old.
Okay.
Always had played guitar and mandolin and domras and balalaikas and weird, just instruments that were laying around the house. My aunt played a lot of instruments, and there was a lot of musicians in my extended family. And so I always had access to them. It wasn't until I was in my teens that I decided that really mandolin was more my voice because what I really liked about it was that you could play violin repertoire on it, stuff that really gets around on the fingerboard of the instrument, but also you can just lay back and accompany another player, which
Right.
for me was the part that I found the most exciting and the most interesting, was just to be a part of the sound that makes someone else sound good. And the musicians that have always impressed me the most are the ones who come from a place of egolessness, but also taste and musicality, and who are able to sound good on their own and also make other musicians sound very good. Mandolin gave me a platform to do that.
Mhm.
I love the sound of it. I love the feel of it. I like the way it felt on my body as I was playing, and in a way that I never connected with the violin. And I still play violin, and I think a lot of people who have played with me when I was much younger and really playing more violin, or as much violin as mandolin and guitar and some other instruments, are still surprised to learn that mandolin is and has been for most of my life my primary instrument. But and nowadays when someone asks me to play violin, the first thing I always say is, you are asking the wrong member of my band because I'm by far the second best violinist in my own band. But mandolin is just represents that sweet spot in in music for me, where I get to do the things that I find interesting and exciting.
Yeah, I think I mirror a lot of your sentiments about the instrument. I mean, it's not my primary instrument,
Mm.
and I really kind of came to it as a way to rehab after a shoulder surgery. I'm a double bass player,
Oh,
so
interesting.
primarily it was just and the guitar and bass. So it allowed me to play like this, after shoulder surgeries. Um, but it does have this perfect hybrid element where you can, provide these harmonies and melodies in the same way that a violinist perhaps can.
And, the chop being such a distinctive part of the sound means you are a melodic instrument, you're a harmonic instrument, and you're also a percussive rhythmic instrument.
Right.
Anytime you want to be any one of those things or all three at the same time. And there's not too many instruments that can really say that. Um,
Mm,
and so I just love it. I still to this day love playing it every minute.
sure.
Violin feels much more like work to me.
I think Sarah would disagree once I get
Uh,
to.
nothing,
So, in terms of like your earliest influences, who were you listening to on mandolin? Who are some of your kind of mandolin heroes, if you will?
I actually tried not to listen to too many mandolinists when I was really developing my sound and my own music. And the problem that I encountered was, there's not that many mandolin players that people are familiar with.
True.
And there really just aren't that many full stop. And like I always joke that every mandolin player knows every other mandolin player, but there's some truth to that. We all kind of know each other. Um, and so, like the problem I have even today is someone will say, "Hey, you sound like Chris Thiele or something." He's the one that everyone knows, and so like not trying to be, you know, um, not trying to be a jerk or anything, but I always want to say, name a mandolinist that you think I don't sound like. know, I there are some mandolinists that I really admire. I mean, Chris is fantastic. It's incredible. That seems so obvious. It hardly bears saying. But my favorites on my own instrument are there's a Brazilian mandolinist named Hamilton de Holanda who's just phenomenal. I find that I can listen to him, but only because the things he does I know that I just can't do, and so there's no chance that I would even surreptitiously steal any of his licks. There's also a player, an American player who's younger than me, named Jacob Jolliffe, who's kind of coming from that generation that had Thiele as his baseline when he was a kid, and is now
Okay.
discovering what's the next thing that you can do after that. And he's finding stuff on the instrument that I just never even considered was possible, and so he's very exciting to listen to. Similar thing, I could listen to him, and there's no danger that I'm going to steal his licks because it's just so phenomenal. But the musicians that I really listen to, if you're going to listen to a Nine Horses record or even just something that I'm doing, you're certainly hearing influences from other instruments much more so than on my own. And so as a kid, I was a really big Eric Dolphy fanatic, and as a
Sure.
composer, Mingus was sort of my north star as a composer in terms of ensemble playing and improvising and risk taking. I found
Sure.
it inspiring. I would listen to the Mingus albums that nobody likes because what I liked about it was he was willing to take the big swing.
Hmm.
Sometimes it's Black Saint and the Sitter Lady, and sometimes it's the clown. But the point is that he's willing to take that risk, and I found that incredibly inspiring. I was a huge Lee Morgan fan, and in fact, in my own playing, you're hearing me trying to get a half valve sound a lot of the time.
Okay.
Sort of a ghost note, but it's really just an imitation of Lee Morgan's sort of half valve thing because I transcribed 1,000 of his solos. And
That's
players today that are my contemporary, I
mhm.
haven't stopped being influenced by and learning from, but hardly any mandolin players.
Very interesting. Yeah, and we've on the program we've done a show. So the essentially the 30 albums we take an album and I discuss it. And starting in 1964, so we've had Mingus albums, Lee Morgan albums. I had interviewed Eric Mingus and did a couple articles on Mingus as well. And yeah, it's that sort of like proficiency on his instrument, but also that ability to take risks, like Dolphy as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and also having worked with I'm not know if you're familiar with Ted Curson, was a trumpet player who worked with Mingus quite a bit. I used
Yeah.
to play with him almost on a weekly basis. And the stories, the
Well,
Mingus stories are absolutely,
I mean, like there's so many that I know, and it feels like if I know it, that means there's 100 that I don't know that are even crazier. You know,
yeah.
sure. And
Yeah.
we've all heard the really crazy, and we've all seen Beneath the Underdog, and
Hmm.
I read Beneath the Underdog and seen the documentary, and I mean, he was a wild guy, but brilliant, incredibly brilliant.
Yeah. And it's funny when I now he was very candid with me, his son Eric, and he won't allow me to air it. But a lot of the stories are you're exactly right. There are more stories. A lot of the stories are fabricated, and even the history of that book uh, is very interesting. This I can share. He was talking about how, essentially Mingus didn't. There was an issue with the publisher, and he just made the most outrageous stories, thinking that the book they would just drop the book, and they printed all his stories. Which his son said. A lot of them were just kind of made up.
I'm sure. I'm sure.
Yeah,
You
but
know,
I digress. So, one other question I have for you, because I wonder if we were there at the same time. When were you at Berklee College of Music? What was your experience there?
I was there 96 to 99, and I had an amazing experience there because uh, what I learned pretty quickly was, because Berkeley, it's now become a very different school, and Sarah can speak to that because she's teaching there currently.
Oh,
Uh,
wonderful.
at the time, um, the string department, because there was no mandolin teacher, so I was technically in the string department, which really meant violins and cellos and stuff. Um, and that was the smallest department in the whole school. There was like 10 students in the whole string department.
Yeah.
Those 10 students have all gone on to do these incredible things, and that includes Evan Price and Casey Dreesen and Rashad Eggleston and Kishibashi and all these amazing musicians. But we became very close to one another. We were very popular because everyone needs strings for their recording projects and their film scoring projects. So we saw each other every single day
Mhm.
recording and collaborating with all these other musicians, and we had a wonderful time. And what I tell a lot of younger students is the thing I learned was Berkeley at that time, it may be different now, I'm not sure, but at the time it was more than half, much more than half international students coming in from all over the world. And they were all doing their own thing. And most of it was stuff that I just had never been exposed to before. And when would I have had an opportunity to be exposed to Portuguese fado music and Andalusian folk music and all this amazing stuff? And so what I learned very quickly was just never say no. Just if someone asks you to do something, you do it, because when are you going to have an opportunity to replicate this experience ever again? When am I going to? I was playing a lot with a pan pipe player named Damian Dragici, who's this incredible virtuoso, and I'd never heard anyone play that instrument full stop, much less a guy who was playing it as well as anyone plays anything anywhere in the world. And it was
Mhm.
blowing my mind, and I never have since. And I'm so thankful for the opportunity to have been in a room with him. And my friends at that time, other than the string department, were Lionel Lueke and Antonio Sanchez and Jeremy Pelt and all these unbelievable players who were all there at the same time. Miguel Zenon. Um,
I'm only smiling because I was there with you at the same time.
were you there really at the same at 96 to 99? Which
I was
years did
there. I was there from 94 to 98.
oh,
And
so we
and
literally did. So you know exactly what I'm talking about. He's
yeah, in
playing.
fact, like Jeremy Pelt was my neighbor.
Ah, man.
Uh, Antonio Sanchez was when I had to do the when you know how they did the system for grading your level. I
Yeah.
was I was in the ensemble with him, and he was always a monster. I didn't know him well, but you
Oh,
know, I always looked forward to those experiences.
I used to. I can't believe I'm about to say this in public, but I used to just hang out outside his practice room and just listen to him practice because for my money, he was my favorite musician at Berkeley, student or faculty, while I was there.
Right.
And that includes John Mayer, who was living in the room next to me at the time.
So,
And I also used to hang
uh,
quite a
so
bit.
you were in college, that was College Ave, right? I mean, not college, the main campus there, 150, right?
Yeah,
Because
that
I
was
was, so we lived on the same floor then probably, if you're, because Mayor was on my floor as well, which is pretty
better.
wild, man. Oh my goodness, that's fine. That's funny. But I think everything you said is exactly sort of my experiences. As much as the classroom was amazing, it was that the access to all these international musicians and what was happening outside of the like after the classes, the jam sessions, the recording sessions, the film scoring sessions, all these things.
My first day on campus at Berkeley, I went to a jam session with some people I knew. And in that jam session was Jimmy Green, Derek Nevergelt, Jeremy Pelt, Lionel Lewicki, and all these players. And it was amazing. Um, and, you know, immediately I had a sense of how far I had to go because, I was nowhere near these guys' league. I still am not. Nobody is. So I just did nothing for the next 3 years while I was there, but practice and study. And I was taking lessons with string players because I was required to, but then also on the side studying with Mick Goodrick and George Garzone, who
Sure.
were tremendous.
Hmm.
And I, yeah, I mean, I hope you're getting a sense of like what my experience at Berkeley was, which was like extraordinary and not a thing that you can really replicate in the real world because you kind of have to focus on a narrower band of music and of life once you get out into the world. But while I was there, I tried to soak up absolutely as much as I possibly could.
Yeah, that's cool. And it's funny because Berkeley keeps coming up, not only because I was there, but my last 3 or 4 interview subjects have been Berkeley. I have an associate. Esperanza was on the show recently.
Uh-huh. There's
And
Sarah.
yeah, I know you have a connection there. And Bill Muller was one of my most recent guests, who I know is a very good bass player, who was there at the same time. And then Georgi Makatsi, who was recently on as well, who's an instructor there. So
I,
it's funny because,
I
yeah,
had a songwriter named Elizabeth Zeman who was at Berkeley a little after us, but she has a poster of a show she did where her band at Berkeley was herself on piano, Esperanza Spalding on piano, on bass, and
sure.
Andy Clark on guitar, who now known as Saint Vincent.
Hmm.
And I was like, man, that is sub bad, tremendous.
That's so cool. Yeah, I could talk to you about this for a while, but I want to move on just for the sake of time. But yeah, that's funny. I knew we had a lot of commonalities when I saw your bio. In terms of the record company that you founded, can you talk about that?
Certainly, yeah. Well, so we had been Nine Horses had been on Sunnyside for a couple of albums, and I always preface this part by saying I have nothing but respect for Francois Zelcan, who did fairly well working for IBM, I think, earlier in his life, and put all of that into a jazz label and and started this amazing label. And he's an amazing guy. But what we were trying to do is start um, what's known as a boutique label, which generally, when you see that, you think of major artists like Jason Isbell has a boutique label, Gillian Welch, even Madonna, Maverick Records was Madonna's boutique label. And the reason major artists are the ones who are generally doing this is because it's front loaded with a lot of time and expense. But
Sure.
we are a progressive and an activist band, and we have certain ideals that we want to, show to the world. And one is that it was really important for us to own our own masters, to own our own music, and to have a contract structure or a label structure that reflected what the music industry is and has become over our lifetime. We don't have to go too much into it, but not much good for artists. And so we created Ad Europa to put out our previous album, Omega. And right at that same time, our friend Sam Sadigursky, who is in Darcy James Argue's band and also in the Philip Glass ensemble, he was putting out a record. And so just on a lark, I said, hey, I just created a record label. We'll put your record out. Did great. And that is the last time I reached out to anyone. Everything
Hmm.
else has been word of mouth. Completely surprising at how well it's done. But we've been in existence at Europa for a little less than 3 years, and we're about to put out our 80th album. The concept seems to be popular, and it's doing well. And on maybe another time we can go into the specifics of how we do everything. But the point is that the artist owns their masters. We take quite a lot less of the royalties, even though we do a lot of the same things that other labels do. And also, very important to us, we create a community of artists that becomes a rising tide, and everyone's boat gets lifted because you're part of this community.
Hmm.
And it's become very popular, and I can't tell you how gratifying it is that it has, just as much as my own music making. The fact that I've also created this other thing that benefits the musical community.
Wow, that's fantastic. Yeah, I would like to learn more about that at some point. Very cool. So, thanks, Joe. I appreciate all that. And
Sure.
if I could, Sarah's sitting there very patiently, so I want to give her some of my time as well.
Go
Um,
ahead, Sarah.
so, Sarah, welcome to the program. If you could you somewhat similar?
Thanks for having us.
Oh, yeah, it's my pleasure. Somewhat similar in terms of questioning, your earliest influence and how you came to play the violin.
Sorry, could you repeat the question? The connection was breaking up a
Oh,
little bit.
okay. How am I
Sorry.
now? Can you hear me pretty well?
Yeah, it's cool.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. I just wanted to know how you came to play the violin and who were some of your influences?
Sure. So I started playing violin when I was around 5 and a half or so. Grew up in a very musical household. My mom was an organist and a pianist, and my dad was a musicologist, a music historian. Didn't really play, wasn't really an expert at any particular instrument, but he could kind of dabble with a lot of different things. But he was really a history lover and brought that passion of research and just of history to the music realm. So yeah, we watched very little TV. It was always about listening to my mom practice, or we were listening to records and things like that. So it was a very natural, kind of organic progression uh, as far as both me and my sister beginning to study music. Um, Piano certainly was an option if we wanted to pursue that, but I think there was something. I think my parents were very open to the idea of letting us explore other instruments to see what would stick, what would be the most interesting to us. It just so happened that there was a great pre-college string program associated with the university where my father was teaching, which was Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana. And yeah, my mom actually knew one of the teachers for that program. She was a student of hers, and she talked to my mom after my mom was teaching assistant for one of the music theory classes at IU. And after one of those classes was finished, this young girl, Rebecca Henry, pulled my mom aside and said, "Oh, your daughter's just the right age to start playing the violin. You should have her come and check out our class and see if it's something that she would enjoy working on." And my mom was like, "Oh, violin?" She wasn't really a big fan. She thought it was. She once referred to it as a squawk box. So yeah, I was like, all right, well, we'll see and check things out. So long story short, we went over to the violin shop in town, and I picked up a little tiny fiddle. And I remember the dress I was wearing. I remember the car ride home. I was so excited, just couldn't wait to get my hands on the instrument. And took the violin out of the case and plucked A and E, and got excited because it was the first couple notes of Twinkle Twinkle, and then I immediately got frustrated that I couldn't figure out how to get the rest of the notes happening. But I was hooked. I was a very shy kid growing up, and music and violin specifically was the place and the activity where I really felt I could be myself and express myself in ways that words were never able to do. So Yeah, I fell in love from day one, and Rebecca was certainly one of my teachers, one of my first mentors. She's now in charge of the pre-college program at Peabody in Baltimore. And then I worked with with Mimi Zweig, who is still in charge of the program, and is doing. She's just done an amazing job with it. Josh Bell was one of her first students. I think he's done pretty well for himself, but she was one of his first mentors as well. And I was just very lucky to have her and Rebecca both as my first guides and my entry into learning about the violin. Um, yeah, and Joseph Gingold was a huge mentor for me. He's one of these classical violin icons, and was certainly one of the violin teachers with whom to study at Indiana University. And I was very fortunate to work with him for the last 4 or 5 years of his life. So that was just an amazing experience. To kind of parallel with my violin instruction in the classical realm, because my parents were so knowledgeable about world music and music history and all of this, they wanted to make sure that both my sister and I had a pretty broad musical view of what music was, different cultures, different styles, different means of expression, different time periods. And so I started taking Baroque violin lessons when I was around 8, and jazz violin lessons around that same time. There were professors that were teaching that at the university, and they were friends with my dad and my mom, and so it didn't take much arm twisting for them to take me on as a student because of that friendship. And yeah, I loved making music. Again, it was how I felt the most free and the most myself. And it didn't matter the style. I think it was one of those things, especially as a kid, you don't necessarily see the differences between things, you see the similarities. And the fact that all of them involved some sort of personal expression, improvisation, it was all a super fun experience, and I loved all of it. So.
Oh, yeah, excellent. Yeah, I mean, uh, it seems like a lot of the music that you guys are making sort of parallels your experience of just world music, all different genres, not being defined by a specific genre at all. Uh, and it's an interesting because it's almost like most people I discuss, who are violinists, they typically start out, their parents are very much into classical, you know, and even here, I'm talking to you from my music school, and the students who play violin traditionally start out very classical oriented. So that's cool. And then one of you both have played with many notables, but one name I wanted to ask you about because I just had her on the show was Esperanza Spalding. How did you come to know her and work with her?
Oh yeah, I love Esperanza. She's just such an amazing person, and I can't speak highly enough about who she is as a person and as a musician. I was a fan of hers, of course, long before I met her. But it was I guess it was must have been in July of 2009. She was preparing to release Chamber Music Society, and she was going to be doing some touring in support of the project. And they of course approached the musicians who were on the album first to see if they were able to do the touring dates. There were like I think maybe about 15-20 dates that were in the calendar at that point. I mean, she was certainly a recognizable name among among jazz musicians, but didn't necessarily have the broader recognition that she has now. So it's kind of a starter tour, getting things going, and the violinist who was in the album could not do the touring, and so one of the friends of the person who was helping to book the tour reached out to me. He knew me from other projects and said, "Hey, what are you doing in August and September?" And told me what the situation was, and I made some phone calls and shifted some things around and cleared the calendar so that I could be part of that first batch of touring, having no idea that it would sort of, explode in the way that it did, because that project, the one that we were supporting, was what we were doing when she won the Grammy for the Best New Artist.
Right.
So, but yeah, it was even just that, even if the tour had just been those 15 dates, 20 dates in the US, it would have been a life-changing experience. Just, you know, who she is and the music that she makes and the musicians who were part of that ensemble. The fact that we were able to do 2 years of touring, actually almost 3 years of touring. Our first gig was at an NPR Tiny Desk concert. It was quite the trial run.
Okay. Okay.
Um, but it was, yeah, that was our first concert together. And that was just like this smaller version of the band. So the actual grouping was string trio, so violin, viola, and cello, piano, backup vocal, drums, and then bass, of course. So yeah, so for the Tiny Desk concert, it was string trio, and then a guitarist that she'd worked with for a long time joined us as well. And yeah, we became family very, very quickly,
Mm.
and it was just an incredible 3 years traveling all over the world, making music, and you know, with her, with SB, she is one who just being herself and being so dedicated to the music and the craft demanded that of us, just in her way of being. And I think we all strove to do our best and to really reach deeper with every concert. So the way we performed the music on those first few shows was very, very different from the way it ended up being. And every concert we were growing from those experiences. So it was a life-changing 3 years for sure.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, even in just the 20 minutes I had an opportunity to speak with her, um, yeah, I mean, you could tell just an incredible spirit. We know that the musicianship is top notch, but I mean, it, I mean, it comes through, right? As she's driving her car, you know, on the phone with me, you know, with the blinker on half the time. But
She's
yeah,
got a magic trick that she can do, like singing a really complex vocal line while playing a completely different, very complex bass line
right.
simultaneously with, and that there are so few people who can split their brains in the way that she does. Like it's
Oh yeah, it's incredible. I mean, it's funny because the few times I have to sing, I play guitar because even just playing upright, which is what I'm more known for, I have a really difficult time singing. And I'm not talking about anything as intricate as what the melodic lines that she's doing. Yeah, it's she unlike anybody else.
yeah, it reminds me of Jimi Hendrix a little bit, or is the first name that comes to mind of someone who could do two completely different, very complex things simultaneously with no sort of loss of feel or time or interest in either part. And it's
Yeah,
just a weird magic trick that some
that's
people.
a good one. Yeah, I didn't make that connection, but yeah, absolutely. I mean, Hendrix was playing these single note lines and singing a completely different melody. Yeah,
You see on the record that it's an overdub, and then you see a live concert, and it's like, ah, he's just.
even better. I know. It's amazing. All right, so let's get into the group if we could. How did you guys meet, and then how did the band kind of come together?
Well, I met Sarah. We were playing a freelance gig in the orchestra supporting a Japanese pop singer at Carnegie Hall. This is roughly 15 years ago, if not more. I've lost
I
track
think it's
at this
more.
point. And I was playing violin on the gig, and I kept apologizing. It was like, this isn't really what I do, and I feel embarrassed playing next to you. And we started playing together as a duo, and pretty quickly realized that we wanted to expand the sonic palette. We added a bass player, which originally was Sean Conley, who now plays with the Knights and a few other people,
Yeah. Mhm.
and is now Andrew Ryan, who's been with us since 2016. So now he's been with us for 8 years. He's now just as integral a part of the band as either of us. Um, yeah, but, yeah. That's how I started. 2012 was our first duo gig.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, the gig that we did together at Carnegie Hall, that was about 15 years ago. And there was a gap of time in between there. And then I reached out to Joe to get some mandolin lessons for a group that I was playing with. Yeah, I'd owned a mandolin, but didn't really know how to do much with it, and especially in the right hand. My picking technique was very questionable. Um, but yeah, so I reached out to Joe, and that was when I think we really started to explore the combination of timbres and styles that we are, just the similarities that we had in our backgrounds and our interests, really exploring how that would come together in a duo format. And we did an EP together just as a duo. And we were really happy and excited about what was being developed. But I think we were also realizing that we were wanting a lower voice to really round out the balance of what we were doing. And that's how Sean got involved, and then of course Andrew later on. So.
Very cool. Yeah, but I mean, it certainly is expanded way beyond just that instrumentation. Having heard the new record which was sent to me. Uh, First of all, it's fantastic as I mentioned. But can you talk about just the expansion
Hmm.
of the sound of the group and just all the possibilities that come with like all this instrumentation that you are now using?
Well, that's it. Every time you add a new color on your palette, you open yourself up to all these other different possibilities. And some of it is, what if we add this color, then what happens? And some of it is you have an idea, and I know, how to create that idea. I need to add this color to the palette. But I would say, most of it is, we've worked with so many different incredible musicians, both of us. And
Mhm.
most of the time, the idea isn't, oh, it would be cool here is if we had a sax line that did this, or if we had a piano line that did that. It's usually, it would be cool as if we had Sam come in and do this, or if we had John Hadfield come in and play drums on this track, because I'm craving that sound to mix with this composition or this combination of sounds that we already have. That the parts that I write for the band don't say the instrument at the top. It says the name of the musician in sort of Ellington style. That's because I'll write something on the page, but I strongly encourage everyone to get off the page and you know, uh, I want every musician that we collaborate with to feel like they've had some creative agency into what we create together, because that's the best version of the music. Always, is the idea that I couldn't have possibly thought of. And
Yeah,
so at its core, it's I'll write something and bring it to Sarah and Andrew, and then only then it really becomes fleshed out, because it then has their creative ideas and their creative input, and that's an integral sort of planned for part of the music. But then you start adding all these other voices, and so like on this album that we're putting out right now, Strum, there are 25 other guest musicians on the album, which is small compared to the last one we did. There was 40 guest musicians on Omega.
We're
Um,
huh.
shrinking.
One day we'll become a tiny little octet. One day we'll become more like the Mingus band, I guess. I don't
Yeah,
know.
but what I notice and what seems pretty remarkable is like the direction can change. It's like at any moment within your music, and part of that is like all of a sudden there's this new instrument that kind of pops into the arrangement, and it's like, wow, that's pretty, like was not expecting it. It all seems to work, but yet it's like it's pretty progressive, but it's still rooted in tradition, and I think it's a really nice combination. And then I was kind of curious, like, and I think you might have already pointed to this, like how much of it is on paper and how much is improvised.
Well, it starts on paper, but the finished version is nothing like what was on the paper, and that's by design. And I want that. Almost never does what you hear resemble what the musician is looking at. It's always, I'll bring it to that musician and say, okay, what if it was this? But also, let me hear what your idea is for this. And no matter what, even if what they think of isn't exactly what I originally had in mind, it always improves the music just by its own, just by the fact of its existence, that it's now you have this other voice that's adding to it, and this other idea, this other perspective. It doesn't, my original idea uh, is just the launch pad, you know. And I'm trying to create the broadest possible launch pad so that all these incredible musicians can then add their voice. And then what happens is something that no one will have ever heard before, because you will have never heard these musicians combined in this particular way. And that to me is what's more interesting than just creating something that's more homogenous, or is, you know, sort of rooted more in one person's conception, which to me becomes much less interesting than what it eventually is, what you hear on the record.
I think there's just to kind of further expand on what Joe's describing. There absolutely, of course, is structure, and there is there's content that Joe has scripted out. But I think what is the way that he works with these compositions is that there's room around those ideas. So it's not necessarily like a solo section where someone's like going to blow over like 24 bars or whatever. I mean, there are those parts, of course, but the parts that are more scripted and more structural, that yes, they're written there, but there's room around that for each person's personality to sort of inspire and inform and be, you know, and eventually a very essential part to the way in which the piece is experienced. But I think, yeah, there's this that breadth, and there's that room for, I guess if you want to, it's not really ornamentation. It's but there's it's just that person's personality really breathing into those lines in ways that Joe isn't going to script out.
Sure.
So there's room for that flexibility. But there are, yes, there are, I think in each piece there is at least one section where someone is just given that freedom to improvise over either chord changes or a rhythmic palette or something. But there is like more freer sections where those kinds of things are actually happening.
Right, right. Okay, cool. Yeah, I mean that was kind of my impression. It seemed like there were these open sections for some blowing, but you know, definitely very well thought out, and you know, a very formalized structure there. And it's true, the musicians do add a very distinctive personality. And I guess that kind of brings me to my next question. I mean, I know I have a hard time getting like a quartet together. So what's what's the recording process, and like how do you get all these fine musicians, and many of them are notable musicians? Um, how do you get them together, or is it a piecemeal kind of recording process?
It, well, so my composition process. What do you do? What does that mean?
Oh, I was gonna say, like, my experience of the album is basically being in that room that Joe is in right now.
I'm also a recording engineer, so you know, part of my compositional process is what we were just describing. Is first you start with like an outline, and then you bring it to some people, and it starts to become fleshed out. Everyone's just hanging their, you know, their voice on the tree like an ornament, and then we start tracking. And as we're tracking, I'm still also composing, because you hear something, someone's, you know, conception, someone's voice gets added to it, and now I have a new idea. Oh, you know, it would be cool to go with that, which usually means another phone call to another musician. You know, and then they come in. John Hatfield recorded all of his drum parts in Paris, where he lives. My apartment is in New York. And what I would do is create scratch tracks for him to play over, with the barest of suggestions. Like a lot of times I would send him a Pro Tools file with some sort of scratch stuff put in there, like
Yeah.
a solo, an improvisation, or something like that, for him to react to, because it's human beings making music. But I would give him like not really much suggestion, other than something like the tune that a single that we put out that's out now is called Roll. My indication to him was make it sound like an organ trio playing in the background of a David Lynch movie. And you know, that was really all he had to go on. And then he sent it back to me, and then I added to that. And I said, okay, now we're getting that organ trio vibe. And so then I sent it to Michael Bellar, who also has a home studio. But other than Michael Bellar, John Hadfield, and the pianos were recorded at Big Orange Sheep. That's Glenn Zaleski and Blair McMillan. Other than that, almost everything you hear was done in this tiny little room that I'm sitting in right now. It's all of Sarah's parts, all of Andrew's parts, all of the other collaborative musicians, except for Jason Truding, who recorded his drums in Princeton, New Jersey.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
that,
So it
Because
go ahead.
I sort of looking at the progression, like, so our first album, we were all in one room, like just, bass, violin, and mandolin. We were in one space over Systems 2 recording studios over here in Brooklyn. And so there was that sort of experience of the recording, the recording process. I think the COVID certainly impacted the way in which we were going to approach recording the next project, because we physically were not able to be in the same room as each other with each other, and to record in that manner. So just kind of adapting as we all did, and the realization that that sort of remote recording and the assembly kind of layer by layer enabled more and more people to be involved, and could really just sort of grow and into a huge landscape, expanse of different voices and just different layers of things. So yeah, it's been kind of interesting because Joe is the mastermind. Like he knows what all of this is going to sound like, and I think for me and Andrew, we got little glimpses of it as we were going along. But I think it's part of the excitement for me is actually now being able to sit down and listen to how everything comes together, and just yeah, just to sort of experience what Joe has been able to assemble in his
it's like a big
artistry.
telephone game. It feels organic because it is musicians reacting to other musicians, but it'll be something I put down and then something John puts down, and then I add this and then I add this. But everyone is reacting to whatever is the last thing I just added.
Right.
And so it still feels organic. And eventually it comes around back to me. And then I mean, like, if there weren't constraints of time and money, I would just keep adding to it or subtracting to it or developing it like a big. Like, at some point, you just have to say, okay, it's done. You got it.
Yeah, because some of them are rather lengthy pieces. I mean, you're in the 10-minute realm, 12 minutes. Um, yeah, and so the drums specifically. So they're all live drums, or is some of that there's some pre-programming, or no?
So that's
It's all live.
John Hadfield plays on 6 tracks. On track 3, Gasparilla, that's Antonio Victor Vargas, who's the drummer in Prince Royce's band. And
Mhm.
then on track 6, Long Time Away, that's Jason Truding from So Percussion playing drums and percussion. But it's all live. The only thing even remotely, synthetic of that is Jason Truding played a little bit of musical saw, which I
Okay.
attached a microphone to and then ran it through a Roland Space Echo. And
Hmm.
so that kind of freaky sound in the background of Long Time Away. But everything else is just a live drum. Um,
Wow, that's pretty remarkable. I mean, it's so tight in some places, and it's
yeah.
I guess just the engineering process, just the different textures that you're getting from the acoustic drum set, um, you know, is pretty cool.
They're
Making
all
me making
extraordinary.
me think at times that perhaps it was like, some programmed drums, uh, but it does have that breadth of acoustic drums.
There's a
So
misnomer that it can only sound organic if everyone is in the room at the same time. And yes, that's certainly the best way to get an organic sound of musicians reacting to each other in the moment and improvising. But I mean, look at the musicians we have on this record. These guys, these musicians are so extraordinary that you can either say we're in a room and we're improvising together, or in a different context, you say, here's something, react to it. Tell me what musically, tell me your feelings on this, your reaction to this. And then you have this other kind of organic reaction, this human reaction. And so the end result, even though hardly any of us were ever in the room with each other while we were recording this, it still has breath and it still feels organic. But that's as much a credit to the musicians we worked with as anything else. It's just cook with good ingredients, and you'll get a good meal.
that's cool. So, in terms of getting people in a room together, is there a tour associated with the album?
We have a couple of shows lined up. The sort of album release show if there is an official album release show, is going to be at Williamsburg Music Center on June 22nd. That information can be found on our website. We have a few other things coming up. Most of what this band does is academic residencies at colleges. We just sort of go around from college to college and spend time with the students and perform, and we write stuff, to perform with students. That's one way for us to be kind of a working and performing band. If you listen to the record, you'll understand why it's very difficult for us to tour as that ensemble.
Sure.
But the three of us at the core of the ensemble do perform quite a bit together and have repertoire that's designed to fit just the three of us. Some
We've
of it
been,
is, oh, go ahead, sorry.
oh, sorry, I was just saying, we've been working as of, with the release, in conjunction with the album's release, we've been working with Joe to find or decide which of the pieces we've recorded are ones we can actually whittle down to a trio.
Sure.
Um, so which one we've done? Gasparilla.
Villa and
Um,
Britannia, which is track 2 on Strum.
yeah.
Um,
But so just so that we're able to actually then share this repertoire, at least like, or an arrangement of these new pieces with audiences that are not necessarily connected with our residencies. So it's especially since we're able to tour now with a little bit more freedom and flexibility like we used to. It's just nice to be able to share like so much of the repertoire that we've been recording over the last 10 years or so.
I mean, the economics of touring are really tough. And also, we all have a million things going on. And so just scheduling, you know, as any musician knows, if it's not a matter of just getting three musicians together to play music, but these specific three musicians, it's really difficult to do. Um, so, yeah.
Yeah, no, I get it. I know. And you guys, you're both teaching at university currently as well?
Sarah is, I was at Manus for many years, but I'm no longer at Manus.
Hold on, okay.
Yeah, I primarily teach at Berklee College of Music. I teach there 2 days a week.
Okay.
And I'm also on faculty. I've got a student at NYU, a student at MSM, Manhattan School of Music, and two students at the New School.
Okay.
So yeah, the semester is basically wrapping up this week. Just did my final trip to Boston. Came back on Monday night and give them some final lessons this week, and then summer vacation.
Yes, I know it well. Yeah, I teach at a Monmouth University.
Oh, cool.
Uh, that's very cool. Okay, so in terms of is there the album itself is available? Will it be available on all the streaming services? I would imagine.
Yeah, June 7th is the actual album release date.
Okay.
We've put out 2 singles already. We have 3 more coming in between now and the release date. We're recording this on May 8th.
Mhm.
So June 7th, about just slightly less than a month from now is the full album release. I recommend that you get it on Bandcamp because that, more money goes to the artist through Bandcamp. But you can get it on vinyl or CD or digital download. And I certainly recommend, if you're going to stream the album, by all means, there's no bad interface with music. But if you like it, come and support the artist and go to Bandcamp and actually get a version of it that you can have and hold in your hands.
Yeah, totally agree. And so, how would they website to get the album?
9horses.bandcamp.com.
Cool.
Number 9. There is another band from the 70s also called Nine Horses, but it's spelled out Nine Horses. David Sylvian's project. And I was not aware of that when we came up with the name for this band. We are named after a Billy Collins poem that was written after that band broke up. So, it's just sort of one of these weird confluences of the universe. So
Right.
we are the number 9 horses, even though
Okay.
there's only 3 of us.
Yeah, that's funny because when I initially saw Nine Horses, my mind kind of went to the possibility that it was that group. Um, Very different. So,
And I've reached out to David Sylvian to say, um, I'm sorry that we ended up this way. we really didn't mean anything by it. Please don't sue us. And he hasn't responded. But if he's listening to this, if there's a small chance that he's listening to this, please reach out to me and just reassure me that you're okay with us being called Night Horses. And I know that Billy Collins is okay with us being named after his poem. Um,
Yeah, it's hard with a name. I mean, there's just so many names out there, and like, who knows? Like, I mean, I play with a band that's there's probably like one of these wedding bands I play with. There's like 30 of them, all throughout the.
I get it.
So what did I miss? Anything else you wanna mention?
No,
Individual projects that you've got going on in addition to this?
yeah, I hope anyone listening to this goes out and checks out the music. We put a lot of work and time and money into it.
What's
As
the date of
we,
our the date of our album release concert? That's June.
that's on the 22nd at Williamsburg Music Center,
Okay.
which is run by Jerry Eastman, who's the brother of Julius Eastman. Amazing musical family there.
Yeah.
So that's a really cool venue. I've never performed there before, but it's a cool venue. So we're looking forward to that. But go check out the record, and I really hope people like it.
Yeah, I know they will, and I would like. I probably should even say this, but I do get to hear a lot of new music and meet a lot of artists through this, and this is one of the most exciting projects I've heard in a long time. So I would certainly recommend that people go and check it out and see the group as well. And that's really all I got.
Thank you so much, Jay. Thank you for your time, and thank you for having us.
Yeah, it was a pleasure meeting you both, kind of, and maybe our paths will cross in some musical situation at some point.
I hope so.
All right, take care, guys. Thank you.